Time now for our regular feature, The Thick of It, where we speak to someone who's been in the middle of one of the week's big stories. On Monday, Labour MP Dame Diana Johnson was responsible for the first defeat for Rishi Sunak in the House of Commons. Successfully winning the rebellion of 22 Conservative MPs, her amendment to the Victims and Prisoners Bill meant the government will have to speed up the compensation for victims of the NHS-infected blood scandal. Up to 30,000 people were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. And more than 3,000 people have died after contracting HIV or hepatitis C because of infected transfusions or blood treatment. I was able to catch up with Dame Diana earlier. Dame Diana, tell me first, obviously I want to focus on what happened this week, but let's go back to the many years that you've been campaigning for victims of the contaminated blood scandal. When did you first become aware of what had happened?
Well, to be honest, I really became aware when a constituent came to see me in 2010, and the general election had just been called. He came to my last surgery and he said to me what had happened to him. He was a mild haemophiliac. He'd had a dental operation at the local hospital and he'd been given dirty blood and he'd developed hepatitis C, and it had affected his life for many years, and he wanted to know how this was allowed to happen, and also, rightly so, he wanted to be compensated for all the lost opportunities that he hadn't had. And I said to him, well, look, if I get back in at the general election, of course I'll try and help. So it was from then onwards, from 2010 onwards, I got involved in the campaign, joining many people who'd fought for decades to get justice. But it was 2010, so 13 years ago.
I mean, incredible that. And as you say, people had already been fighting for decades to get justice. And you took the campaign and really gave it rocket boosters. But when you think that a person infected with contaminated blood dies on average every 4 days, it's shocking, isn't it, that all those years of campaigning have only now borne fruit?
Absolutely. It is shocking. And that's why when we got the public inquiry in 2017, Theresa May announced it. Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the inquiry, who's due to report shortly, he couldn't wait for his final report because, as you say, one person dies on average every 4 days. So in April this year, very unusually, he said, before my final report is published, I'm going to make some recommendations about compensation. And I'm going to say to the government, you need to get on with it. You need to set up a body to start to pay compensation. You need to extend interim payments and various other recommendations. So the government have had that since April, and we've been hoping that they would respond and deal with those recommendations quickly, and they haven't.
Well, let's bring this up to date this week, because it was a very dramatic week for you and for the victims of this scandal. So on Monday, you tabled an amendment to the Victims and Prisoners Bill to speed up compensation for victims of the scandal. Tell us the steps that went into that and the politics around it, and particularly how you managed to get Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, on side.
Well, this has always been a cross-party issue. It's never been a Labour issue or a Conservative issue. So for many years, MPs from all parties have worked together to campaign. So once I knew that the report stage, the final stage of the Victim and Prisoners Bill, was coming back before Parliament, I saw that as an opportunity to try and get the government to act on the recommendations from April. And so I went round, as you do, and asked my colleagues across party to sign up for the amendments that I tabled. And I was really fortunate. We got over 140 MPs from all parties. All 10 parties in Parliament were represented in that group of 140 MPs. So we had those names tabled by the end of the previous week. So the government knew there was a head of steam building on this. And what really amazed me, Kathy, was that nobody from the government contacted me. Nobody rang me up and said, look, Diana, we see you've got all these MPs. What can we do? Is there something we can do to try and get you not to push this to a vote or try and sort it out? Nobody contacted me. And that was shocking, because I've been around in Parliament long enough to know that if you see backbenchers coalescing and coming together in the numbers that we had, there was likely to be a vote in Parliament. It was likely to be selected by the Speaker, and therefore something should have been done. And of course, for my own party, I had to say to my own party, look, there's an injustice here, the government need to act. Labour needs to be on the right side of this. We need to be pushing the government. And that was something that Rachel felt able to do, to get behind the amendment to set up the body to start to pay out compensation, as Sir Brian had said in April. So by Monday, we had, the Labour Party supporting MPs, and I knew there was a lot of other MPs who wanted to put their names but couldn't for various reasons. Either they were front benchers or they weren't going to be around for the vote.
And just take us behind the scenes, because you talk about, as you do, you gathered those names, the 140. Do you go around like the tea rooms, the bars? How do you do it?
Yeah, you do. You talk. And what I've found is the personal approach helps. So, yes, I went round the library. I was skulking in the library to see who I could get in there. I went round the tea rooms. I saw MPs walking around, and I just asked them. And, we've got a core group of MPs who've always been interested in this. So I knew that they would support. So Sir Peter Bottomley, for example, from the Conservatives, a co-chair. I talked to Robert Buckland, senior member of the Conservative Party. I talked to the SNP. They've always been very supportive of this. Put some pressure on the Lib Dems through contacts I have with the Lib Dems. So, yeah, I spoke to Plaid, spoke to the DUP, spoke to the SDLP. I spoke to a lot of people.
Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, obviously previously a very senior civil servant, and she helped set up the infected blood inquiry under Theresa May's premiership. Did she play a role in Labour coming on side? Because, there's quite a significant cost implication. So it wasn't easy to get the Shadow Chancellor to sign off on this, was it?
So Sue Gray and I know each other because every time I was raising contaminated blood issues in Parliament and was getting a bit cross about the lack of action from government, Sue was kind of in the meetings then that I had with ministers. So I knew Sue, and I knew that, she was doing a lot of work as a civil servant to progress this. Clearly now she works in the leader's office, and I'm sure has her views and expressed those views to the leader and to Rachel. And I'm just really glad for any support we can get, because there is an injustice here, and I think Sue recognises that. And I know, she did her best in government to try and move this along, not as quickly, unfortunately, as I would have liked. And I think there has been a lack of political will. They've always seen this as an issue that can wait, and actually it can't wait.
Well, the government whipped MPs against your amendment. Presumably that was a disappointment, was it? Or did you feel that was kind of inevitable?
I was hugely disappointed by that. The fact that they would whip when they had said already from the dispatch box that they accepted the moral case for compensation to be paid. And they had been saying to me for months, we're working at pace, we're working on Sir Brian's recommendations, that we were all expecting Sir Brian to produce his final report in November. So from April to November, that's what the government were telling us. Sir Brian's had to delay it until next year because he's having to contact all the people he's going to criticise, as I understand it. So there's a delay. So all the work should have been done by November in any event. So when I heard that the government were having a heavy whip on this, I was really taken aback. And I had a conversation actually twice with Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, who was the Health Secretary for many years, and has always said that he believed there should have been a public inquiry and compensation should be paid. In fact, he signed a letter with Andy Burnham and Matt Hancock to the government saying that compensation should be paid. So I had that conversation twice with Jeremy, and I basically said to him, just let this go through. And if there's a problem with the wording, we can get that sorted in the Lords. But we're all on the same page here, aren't we? We all want compensation to be paid. And I don't know what went wrong. He said to me that the wording wasn't correct in the amendment I tabled. It was exactly the wording that Sir Brian had used in his recommendations to government. So I was a bit surprised by that. And I didn't really have an explanation as to why the government couldn't accept what they'd already said. They morally accepted compensation should be paid. I don't really know, to be honest.
Well, so you now needed to get a number of Conservative MPs to rebel to get this through. How did you go about that? I mean, did you buy a few drinks or what?
No, I didn't buy any drinks, no. Well, the government said that they would table their own amendment in the Lords. That was the offer they made. And so for some MPs, some Conservative MPs, perhaps they thought, yes, that was sufficient and they could wait. However, I've heard promises made before, and what I was really concerned was that was another delay because the bill won't be going into the Lords probably until after Christmas. There's going to be months of, and I didn't know what exactly was going to be tabled by the government. So my view was to MPs who asked me, Conservative MPs, was I was going to test the view of the House, because I thought the government should really pay attention to a lot of backbenchers who are raising an issue. And so for some MPs, I know Conservative MPs, they didn't want to vote against this, but they were willing to abstain, and that was quite important. And then there were a number, and I'm very thankful to that number of MPs from the Conservative Party who decided actually they wanted to vote positively for this amendment. So I was really delighted that we got a range of names who came forward and supported it. And, people, as I've said, Robert Buckland in particular, Peter Bottomley, Tracy Crouch, Chloe Smith, these are big senior figures in the Conservative Party. So I was really pleased they were able to support the amendment.
And Caroline Wheeler, the Sunday Times political editor, who's written a book on the whole scandal, said on X that she really didn't think it was going to go through. She'd spoken to a number of Tory rebels in Parliament and knew that the government was, in her words, working hard to buy them off. Did you feel very nervous ahead of the vote?
Yes, I did. And actually, when we went to vote, in the I lobby, there weren't many Conservative MPs, or I didn't see many, and that worried me. And I thought, oh, we haven't got the numbers, because we needed a good chunk of Conservatives to vote for this, as well as all the other parties which did support this. And, the DUP said to me, we're here, we're voting for this, lots of SNP, Lib Dem. So I was thinking we haven't got this. And I remember I walked through the lobby, went back into the chamber, sat down, and I sent Caroline a message and I said, I don't think we've got the numbers on this. And then just a few minutes later, the first indication was where the whips stand, because the Labour whips stood in the place where the government whips normally stand, because that's the winning side. They normally stand there and read it out. And it was Labour. The Labour whips were standing there. And I thought, oh, my goodness. And then, of course, they read it out, and it was just a number 4 majority, a number of 4. But it was enough. If you get one, you've got a majority. So that was a bit of a shock. And of course, you're not allowed to clap and cheer in the House of Commons. And there was a spontaneous outburst of clapping and cheering, and I clapped. Yeah. So that was wonderful.
Amazing. Yeah. So a real breach with protocol.
Yes,
and it was an emotional moment because some of the campaigners were there, weren't they, in the Commons? Tell us about that.
They were up in the gallery. I could see the chair of the Haemophilia Society, Clive Smith, who's done an amazing job, and Jason Evans, who's also done a wonderful job at campaigning, raising the issue. And he sadly lost his dad through the contaminated blood scandal many years ago. So they were up in the gallery, and I was very conscious that they were there listening to what MPs were doing. And I know Jason has reflected on his time in the public gallery and said when he heard the shouts of no, because in the Commons we shout, aye and no. When he heard Conservative MPs shouting no to that amendment to pay compensation to this group of people, he said that really was a very low point. But the good thing about this is that Parliament, cross-party, sending that message to government that no, we can't wait any longer. The government need to act. It's the moral, just, right thing to do. And Parliament, I think, came together to send that message to government.
And it's interesting hearing you take us behind the scenes and just the work that you've done across party. I think a lot of people think that, MPs are kind of constantly at each other's throat, but you've worked with your sworn political enemies on this.
I have. And, I was reflecting on the people who signed the amendment originally. We had Jeremy Corbyn and we had Sir John Hayes signing that amendment. So, two very, very different
couldn't be
political
more different.
Animals. And I just thought, actually, this is not party political. This is about an injustice, and Parliament saying we need to sort this out. We need to get compensation to people. That's what it was about.
Well, Diana, what happens next?
So the government also said they're going to make a statement before Christmas about what steps they're taking. So I'm very pleased to hear that, because interim payments are still to be addressed by the government. They made some interim payments in October 22, but Sir Brian in April said they should be extended. So I'm hoping they might come with some news on that. We then expect Sir Brian's final report in March next year, and I hope the government will act immediately on that. And of course, this bill will go through the Lords, and we'll see what happens in the Lords in terms of whether the government try and remove this amendment that was passed in the Commons, or whether they table something else.
Have you had any indication? Have you had, ministers take your side and whisper something? No.
That's one of the issues, again, Kathy, that I haven't had any minister speak to me since the vote, really.
Really? Amazing.
And that's amazing. Yeah, it is amazing, because we're all on the same side here. We all want to get justice, don't we?
Well, how soon do you think that victims will start getting money in their pockets?
I can't say that, Kathy. I just know that it needs to happen much sooner, really.
It needs to happen 10 years ago, more.
Yes, of course. And there's a lot of talk about the cost of this. Well, the issue is, if those people had received compensation 10, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be facing the bill that we are today. And these people, just as the people involved in the Horizon scandal with the post office, they are getting compensation paid now before the final report on that scandal. This group of people deserve it even more so, because they are dying. People are dying. And I think that's the thing that everyone has to remember. People are losing their lives now.
Well, Dame Diana Johnson, thank you very much for joining us to tell us about your long campaign for this and your victory this week.
Thank you.